The story of the real Godfather of Harlem, Bumpy Johnson by AVoice podcast. I'm Brad, and I'll be your host as we uncover the untold, powerful story of America's most legendary drug lord, the man who ruled Harlem with brains, muscle, and respect. Al Capone may have ruled over Chicago. Lucky Luciano may have controlled nearly all of New York. But when it came to Harlem, there was only one name that mattered: Bumpy Johnson. You might not be familiar with his name, yet he was one of the most influential gangsters in American underworld history. From 1930s to the 1960s, he was considered the Godfather of Harlem, a neighborhood in northern Manhattan where he held absolute control. Want to run an illegal gambling operation? You had to go through Bumpy. Want to open a speakeasy? You had to go through Bumpy. Want to do anything illegal in Harlem? You had to go through Bumpy. Even Frank Lucas, the notorious drug trafficker played by Denzel Washington, an American gangster, was one of his right-hand men. He once said, if you wanted to do business in Harlem, you did it with Bumpy Johnson, or you were dead. Whenever the police or politicians needed something, they turned to him. Even the Mafia had to go through Bumpy to conduct business in Harlem. No other African-American gangster of that era had ever achieved such power and influence. At a time when racial discrimination was deeply ingrained, black men had to fight through obstacles just to claim a piece of the American dream, even in a criminal underworld. Bumpy Johnson was the exception to the rule. But before becoming the Godfather of Harlem, he, like many others, started at the very bottom. Here's his story. You know, back in the day, if you wanted to stay safe, you had to watch your back. Make sure no one was following you. Keep your business quiet. Today, the real threats aren't in the streets. Bumpy, whose real name was Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, was born on October 31, 1905, in Charleston, South Carolina. During this time in the United States, racial segregation was still in effect, so his family settled in the city's black neighborhood. The Johnsons were a modest family, respected in their community. They were also very religious and attended church regularly. His father William worked as a fisherman, while his mother Margaret worked as a domestic servant. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson had 8 children: Margie, Priscilla, Pauline, Willie, Mabel, Lena, Elise, and finally, Ellsworth, nicknamed Bumpy, a name he would keep for life due to a bump on the back of his skull. Around the age of 1 or 2, Bumpy spent the entire year living with his father and brother Willie. The reason for this was that his mother had 2 jobs, one in Charleston, where the Johnson family lived, and another in New York. There, she took her 3 eldest daughters, Pauline, Mabel, and Lena, with her to help her work as a domestic servant. Although she would return to Charleston once her seasonal work in New York was over, her absence from the family home created a void in young Bumpy's life. He sought a maternal figure in one of his older sisters. At school, he was said to be incredibly intelligent and talkative, so much so that he had skipped 2 grades at the public school in Charleston. Ironically, he would never finish high school, a source of shame for Bumpy, who had been raised in a family that greatly valued education. As a result, he didn't hesitate to lie, claiming that he had attended a prestigious school in Charleston, where the wealthiest black families sent their children, or that he had attended a prestigious university in New York. However, he was so clever and charming that no one ever questioned him when he claimed to have a college education. Bumpy also had a rebellious side and was always very sensitive to the racial injustices faced by black people in the segregated South. In fact, his family found itself in turmoil due to these racial discriminations when he turned 10 years old. At that time, Willie, his 19-year-old brother, was accused of killing a white man in South Carolina, an area known for taking matters into their own hands when a black person committed an offense against a white person. The horrific lynching of Kit Bookhart in 1904 in Berkeley County, located about 60 kilometers from the Johnson family home, served as a perfect example. Kit Bookhart, a 21-year-old black man, went fishing one day with 6 white men. But on the way back, a dispute broke out between Bookhart and one of the men. Bookhart threatened to strike him, apparently because the man had struck his younger sister, and he wanted revenge. However, revenge was something he could not fulfill. When they returned to town, he was arrested because of the quarrel and forced to pay a $5 fine. The problem was, he didn't have the money to pay it. He was then thrown into prison, but while there, a group of white men demanded he be handed over, and that's when everything escalated. They took him to the edge of a river and tortured him. They scalped him, gouged out his eyes, cut off his genitals and tongue, then tied him to a grate and threw him into the river to drown. None of the people responsible for this crime were ever brought to justice. So, when Willie, Bumpy's older brother, returned home and told his family that he was accused of killing a white man, the Johnsons panicked. They wanted to save their son from a possible lynching, so they quickly got him out of town and sent him to New York, where Margie and Pauline were already living. Bumpy joined them later in 1919. His father had arranged for him to be sent to his older sister, Mabel, who lived in Harlem, hoping to give him the opportunity for a better life. At that time, Bumpy was 14 years old and was rather small for his age. A small size he made up for with his tough guy attitude. But sometimes that wasn't enough, and Bumpy became the target of the bullies in his neighborhood. One such altercation happened on his first day at school in Harlem. He was only 2 blocks away from his school when he crossed paths with 6 other teenagers standing on the street corner, throwing dice against a building. He slowed down and took a glance, and just as he was about to walk away, he heard one of the boys call out to him and felt someone grab his arm. "EYU, country, what you got in your pocket?" "My hand? Why, you got a problem with that. Old country boy got some mouth on him," said one of the bullies, named Junie, with a laugh. "Well, take your hand out your pocket and let me see what else is in there," said another boy, nicknamed 6 and 8, as he stepped closer. "Man, you don't want me to take my hand out of my pocket, 'cause if I do, I'm gonna smash it against your head." Meanwhile, the other boys were betting on who would win the fight between 6 and Bumpy. Finley bet on 6, while another boy named Nat placed his money on Bumpy. It was 6 who threw the first punch. He aimed for Bumpy's chin, but missed. Bumpy, being smaller and faster, easily dodged it, causing his opponent to lose his balance. Then, Bumpy pulled his hand out of his pocket, and as promised, 6 was going to regret it. His fist landed squarely in the middle of 6's face, breaking his nose. 6 fell to his knees as blood sprayed everywhere. Bumpy's second punch hit 6 in the side, weakening him even more. Yet 6 was still not down. He clung to Bumpy's pants, trying to push himself back up. But Bumpy struck again, and this time, when he hit him, coins fell from his fist and scattered on the ground. Finley, who had bet on 6, saw the cheating and shouted, "That's not fair. He's fighting dirty." On his side, Bumpy kept landing punch after punch on his opponent. He finally managed to make 6 release his grip on his pants and knocked him down with a violent kick between the legs. However, it seemed that Bumpy wasn't finished yet, as at that moment, he was preparing to deliver another kick to 6 ahead. But before he could do so, a hand grabbed the back of his collar, and he was thrown against a car. "Okay, little N, you done won me my money already, but I can't let you kill my boy here," said Nat. "Fuck you," replied Bumpy, now ready to fight Nat. Nat smiled and responded, gradually backing away from Bumpy. "I ain't fighting you, man. Like I said, you done won me my money, and you better be glad there was money riding on this fight, else we all would've jumped your ass." This time, it was Bumpy's turn to smile. "And I would've kicked all your asses, and I still will." After that, Bumpy, Nat, Finley, and Junie became close friends, an enduring friendship that would last until the end of their lives. Following this encounter, Bumpy never set foot in school again. Every morning, he would leave his sister Mabel's apartment to meet his new friends. They would go out to try to make money playing pool, shooting craps, or selling newspapers. They soon started sweeping the sidewalks in front of certain businesses in Harlem, and they earned even more money. Bumpy was clearly the brains of the gang, and it didn't take him long to realize that he and his friends could make even more by offering their protection to some of the new stores in the neighborhood. And it was through this that he met Bub Hewlett. Bub Hewlett was one of those fearless thugs in Harlem who never walked around without a knife, a baseball bat, or a gun in hand. They would use any excuse to pull out their weapons, whether it was against the police or Irish gangsters who dared set foot on their turf. Of all these criminals, Bub was the most violent. Standing at 6 feet 1 inch with an imposing build, he was the kind of guy you didn't want to mess with. Bub made his living by extorting money from local businesses in exchange for protection from local thugs. One day, he and Bumpy met. When Bub heard about the opening of a grocery store on 7th Avenue, he went there to offer his protection services. But to his surprise, the store owner told him he had already paid for protection and pointed at Bumpy, who was leaning against Bub's black Lincoln, arms crossed, glaring at him through the store's window. Bub said, laughing at the store owner. At the time, Bumpy was 16 years old, about to face a gangster almost twice his age, who was also a good 10 centimeters taller than him. At that moment, Bub could have easily knocked young Bumpy out with a single punch. But he admired the kid's guts, so he offered to partner up. And that's how Bumpy began his rise in the Harlem underworld. By now, Bumpy hadn't been to school for several months. His sister Mabel was worried and insisted every day that he go back. But seeing all the money he was bringing home, she started to leave him alone more and more. In the 1920s, Bumpy and his crew made their living through all sorts of rackets, as well as burglaries. They no longer just protected grocery store or restaurant owners. They expanded their protection services to club and speakeasy owners as well. During this time, Bub Hewlett, who had developed a fondness for Bumpy, suggested that he and his crew diversify by offering protection to owners of illegal lotteries in Harlem. Some of these owners were among the richest in the neighborhood, earning several $1,000s a week, all tax-free. These people didn't hesitate when it came to protecting their money. They were willing to pay for the toughest bodyguards in town. Bumpy seized the opportunity to make even more money. From then on, he quickly became one of the best in this field, to the point where he was one of the most sought-after bodyguards in Harlem. His reputation grew day by day, and it was about to take off thanks to someone known at the time as the Queen of the Illegal Lottery, none other than Stephanie St. Clair. Stephanie St. Clair was a French-born gang leader in Harlem. She operated in the gambling business and, by the 1920s, had built a vast criminal empire in the neighborhood. She hired Bumpy to protect one of her many illegal lotteries. Impressed by his protection skills, she made him her personal bodyguard. Bumpy would escort her when she went to see plays, and a quick friendship developed between the two. Bumpy admired St. Clair's class, but also the fact that she was always ready to fight to protect what was hers. This came to light in the 1930s, when the Mafia tried to take a slice of the illegal gambling business in Harlem. The underground lottery made a lot of money in that part of New York, so it was natural for the Mafia to want to get involved. Dutch Schultz, a gangster linked to New York's 5 families, took charge of the operation. Schultz operated in the Bronx and had made a fortune through alcohol smuggling during Prohibition. In 1933, with Prohibition repealed, he was forced to find new sources of income. To expand his empire, he turned to a very profitable business, the illegal lottery in Harlem. We're in the middle of the Great Depression, and at the time, an illegal gambling game had become widespread in Harlem, the numbers game. The numbers game was like a lottery for the poor. The gambler had to pick 3 numbers, and if the numbers were drawn the next day, they won a prize based on their bet. To participate in the numbers game, all you needed to do was bet $1 with the hope of winning $600. The temptation to play was immense for the people of Harlem, who usually earned only $10.15 a week. By the early 1930s, this business was generating more than $50 million annually, an enormous amount, especially considering the economic hardship the country was facing. Some of the lottery owners were making more money than the President of the United States, which was a clear indication of the scale of the operation. It didn't take long for Dutch Schultz to learn about this opportunity. His goal was to grab a slice of the pie, and when you knew the man, you understood that this threat had to be taken seriously. Schultz was a paranoid man, he could kill for pleasure, and answered everything with violence. On one occasion, he and his men had beaten a man almost to death, tied him up, and blindfolded him with a piece of clothing infected with a sexually transmitted disease, rendering him blind. St. Clair clearly had reason to be worried. Schultz had started sending his men to Harlem to tell the lottery owners that he was ready to join their operations. In exchange, he promised they wouldn't have problems with the police and offered protection, particularly against kidnapping, a threat which, in reality, was perpetrated by his own men. From there, he managed to establish himself in Harlem's gambling business, and his empire grew significantly, something that didn't sit well with St. Clair. A war between the two factions was now inevitable. Bumpy, on the other hand, was still under St. Clair's command. In the 1920s, he had been arrested several times. He was sent to prison for burglary, serving 2 years out of a 10-year sentence. Then, in 1927, he was sentenced to another 2 years for assault. Not long after his release, he was sent back again for theft. But it was after serving this last sentence that things really started to get serious for him. By the end of 1931, Bumpy was released from prison after serving 2.5 years. During his absence, Stephanie St. Clair had received a visit from Bub Hewlett, who now worked for Schultz. Bub tried to convince St. Clair to join their organization, which by then had taken control of most of Harlem's lottery operations. This proposition infuriated her. The pressure on her crew was only growing stronger. Ever since her conflict with Schultz, she and her men had been the target of drive-by shootings. Her employees were being brutally beaten, and some were even threatened with the worst if they dared to keep working for her. Despite all these troubles, St. Clair had managed to keep her gambling empire alive, though on a smaller scale. Many of her men remained fiercely loyal to the Queen of Harlem. She knew how to inspire them, and would say things like, "What kind of men would desert a lady in a fight?" However, many couldn't withstand the immense pressure from Schultz and his men. They had tried to hold out for as long as possible, but the relentless threats eventually broke their will to keep working for St. Clair. She was cornered, but she still had one last hope. She knew that someone she trusted would soon return to Harlem. Someone who was always ready to fight, especially when a white man tried to take something from black people. Bumpy was about to make his comeback. It had only been 2 days since Bumpy was released from prison. At 25 years old, he was back on the streets of Harlem. That's when he ran into Bub Hewlett at a bar. Bub patted him on the shoulder. "I see you made it home. Welcome back. How'd they treat you up there? How you think? Like shit? Well, you got it right." Both of them laughed, but what was at stake was anything but funny. Everyone in Harlem knew that Bub worked for Schultz, and that he would try to convince Bumpy to join them. At the same time, everyone also knew that St. Clair wanted Bumpy as her ally in this war. People were left wondering which side Bumpy would choose. Bub went on, telling Bumpy that he had a job for him. "Yeah? What? Same thing you was doing before you left the streets? Just keeping folks in line, making sure they do what they supposed to do. And what they ain't supposed to be doing is writing numbers for anyone but that Jew guy." "Schultz, huh?" Bub then looked at him in surprise. "So you heard, huh?" "Yeah, I heard while I was in the joint. They say the Jew guy been taking over the numbers in Harlem. Said he's hired a bunch of treacherous colors to beat up other colors. You heard anything about that? You grown now, lil, n asterisk asterisk a, cause it seems like you smelling yourself. You so grown you think you gonna try me?" "Nah, I ain't gonna try you, but I'm not expecting you to try me either. I ain't in this shit, and I don't see any reason to get in it." "Good to hear. At least not right now." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I only been out 2 days, so I gotta get the lay of the land again, see what I'm gonna be doing. You work for Dutch, and I can guarantee you 200 a week. I heard you getting paid 300. Oh, so now you think you should be getting what I get? I told you that you smelling yourself, but you's a good man. Let me talk to Schultz and see what he says. I'm sure we can work something out." "Nah, don't do that. I can't ever see myself siding with the white man over the black man. You do what you gotta do, and I'll see what I'ma be doing." "Fair enough." Then the two shook hands and parted ways. Later that night, Bumpy went to see Stephanie St. Clair. "I want to take care of the damn Dutchman. Run him out of Harlem and back to the damn Bronx, where he belongs. Or better yet, kill him and put him out of his misery." "But Queenie." No, but Queenie. I want you to kill him or I kill him myself." Queenie, you know I'm not scared. But what you talking about is all-out war. Who's gonna finance your war? You think me got no money? I got plenty of money. Well, it's gonna take a lot more than just plenty of money. Figure you're gonna have to pay at least $200 a week for each good man. And even if you only have 10, which really ain't near enough, that's $2,000 a week, in addition to the men you gotta buy, guns, and pay off the cops, put up bails. And this is not gonna be a matter of days or weeks. This is gonna take months, maybe years. Hell, you think you've got enough money to last that long? Especially with your spots being hit every other day? Finally, Bumpy in St. Clair organized a meeting with dozens of African American figures from Harlem's gambling scene. Most of them expressed doubts about the Bumpy Street Clair alliance winning. Many were afraid, not just of losing money, but of losing their lives, due to Schultz's looming threat. However, some chose to stand by their side, and that marked the true beginning of the war between Schultz and St. Clair. In this war, Bumpy had the unwavering support of his old friends, Nat, Finley, and Junie. One day, while out with them, he spotted Bub Hewlett on the other side of the street. Bub responded suspiciously, one hand tucked into his pocket. That's when Nat noticed Bub's hidden hand. Bumpy signaled to him that everything was fine, all while keeping an eye on Bub, whose hand remained inside his pocket. Man, you making the wrong move. The queen's going down. The writing is on the wall. Yeah? You know that means you're going up against me and my men. I know. This shit's gonna get interesting. Guess I'll be seeing you around, Bumpy. Yeah, man, but I'm banking on seeing you first. Bub and Bumpy burst into laughter once again, before parting ways. Once back in the car, Bumpy turned to his friends, and said, I feel like the President of the United States. I just declared war, and you guys are my army. Now we gotta come up with a battle plan. The first thing Bumpy and his men had to do was find weapons. For this, they could rely on Finley. Junie, on the other hand, was the second brain of the group, the ideal person to carry out Bumpy's plans. Bumpy, therefore, was the planner, and Nat was in charge of the paybacks, a ruthless type who would stop at nothing. With his gang of 9 men, Bumpy went after Schultz's soldiers. They were vastly outnumbered, so their only option was to adopt a guerrilla strategy, in the hopes of prevailing. And it must be said, they did very well. Unlike Schultz's men, Bumpy and his crew blended in effortlessly as African Americans in Harlem, which gave them a huge advantage. However, facing Bub Hewlett's crew was a different story. Bub had a deep grudge against Bumpy, and the feeling was mutual. The two factions clashed repeatedly, but neither managed to gain the upper hand. The Bumpy versus Bub duel finally ended in April 1933, 6 months after the war started, when Bub, in a matter unrelated to the conflict between Schultz and St. Clair, was sentenced to serve a prison term of 2 to 5 years. After his incarceration, most of Bub's men abandoned the battle against Bumpy, except for a few diehards like Ulysses Rawlins. Ulysses Rawlins had replaced Bub as Schultz's main enforcer in Harlem. In 1934, his intentions were clear. He wanted to take down Bumpy. Upon hearing this news, Bumpy laughed, though he didn't underestimate his new adversary, who had a reputation for being a dangerous man. Moreover, Schultz rarely set foot in Harlem, which frustrated Bumpy because he had never had the chance to reach him. Schultz always traveled with multiple bodyguards, which made the task even more difficult. But Bumpy still had one card to play. This card involved contacting someone who personally knew Schultz, the boss of the New York Mafia, Lucky Luciano. Bumpy reached out to Luciano at the end of 1934 to discuss the ongoing war in Harlem, which was resulting in more and more deaths. Luciano, of course, was aware of what was happening in that part of New York. He listened carefully to Bumpy, but then told him that he couldn't get involved. He added that if he ever decided to stick his nose in, he would lay down his terms, namely to take over the gambling business in Harlem and add Bumpy to his list of employees for about $1,000 per week. Bumpy was clearly disappointed by his response. He then warned Luciano that if he tried to target the illegal lottery operators in Harlem, he would have no choice but to go after him personally. This made Luciano laugh, and he told Bumpy that he had no chance of winning a war against him, to which Bumpy smiled and responded, "That's the same thing Schultz said. And here I am, 3 years later, speaking with you." Although impressed by Bumpy's audacity, Luciano remained firm in his stance, and the two men left it at that, at least for the moment. Meanwhile, the war in Harlem continued to rage. It was during the summer of 1935 that Bumpy and Rollins first clashed. It happened when Bumpy was taking a girl out to dinner. Thanks for watching. We end this American story of one of America's most legendary figures. Stay tuned for more powerful stories from AVoice podcast.